Could everyone please take their seats now, and please approach the mourners afterwards.
Yossl, have a look. Yossl. I want my son Johnny here. I want him to sit here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Ha'emet, where's the emet? Where's the emet? No emet. No emet.
Okay. We'll start, if you wanted to follow, those of you who've got the sheets and want to follow, we doing some of the Tehillims on the first page, starting with Tehillim Aleph, number 1. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzat rashayim, u'v'derech hatayim lo amad, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav, ki b'torat Adonai chefzo, u'v'torato yehege yomam v'layla, v'haya ka'et shatul al palgemayim, asher piyo yiten bito, v'eleyu lo yibo v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach, lo chen rashayim, kim kamot asher tiftenu ruach, al ken lo yikum rasham b'mishpat v'chatayim v'adat tzadikim, ki yodeh Adonai derech tzadikim, v'derech rashayim toved. I'm going to go now on to Psalm 15. God, who may live in your tent, who may enter your presence or onto your holy mountain. Those who lead blameless lives, they do what is right. They speak truth from a sincere heart. They refuse to slander others or harm their neighbors. They despise persistent sinners. They honor the faithful followers of God. They keep their promises even when it hurts. They don't charge money on the interest they lend and refuse to accept bribes to testify against those who are innocent. Such people always stand firm. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai mi yagub alecha, mi yishkon bar kodshecha, alech tamim v'tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo, lo ragal al leshono, lo asa l're'a v'chepa lo nasa al krovo, nivzeh be'enav nimatz v'tirei Adonai yechabed, nishpa l'arav lo yamir kaspo lo natan b'neshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach, ose ele lo yimot l'olam. Chaf Gimel, or 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows and leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength and guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. And even if I walk through the dark shadow of the valley of death, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your shepherd staff comforts me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You welcome me as a guest. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings, and surely your goodness, your unfailing compassion will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai mi yagub aroi lo echsa, binoteh asher yabitzeini, al mei menuchot yanahaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek. למען שמו, גם כי אלך בגיא המוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי, שבטך משענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי, דשנת בשמן ראשי כוסי רוויה, אך טוב החסד ירפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. פתח לנו שער בעת נעילת שער, היום יפנה, השמש יבוא ויפנה, נבוא שעריך. Open for us a gate. At this time of the locking of the gate, for the day is passing, the day will pass, the sun will set and pass, we will come before your gates. These poignant words come from the final Ne'ilah Tefillah of Yom Kippur, which would have been well known to Yossl Baker. For every Yom Kippur, he would stand at the Aron Kodesh at the Ark at Elwood Shul, surrounded by his boys, as its urgent lyrics and its evocative chords would resound through the Shul. But for Yossl, this Tefillah, these words, were more than a profound prayer. They were, in a sense, the song of his life. For Yossl lived his life with an acute awareness of the transience, the evanescence of time, the passing of the day. After Auschwitz and Buchenwald, he knew too well about the closing of gates. Yossl lived his life with a crisp and a vibrant intensity. He was deeply present in the present. When you spoke to Yossl, he engaged fully with you. His face would crinkle with delight, especially at his own favorite jokes, which he told, of course, with his inimitable Yiddish brogue. He was, as Gaby reminded me, everyone's favorite Zayda. Loving without being judgmental, warm without being cloying, sharp without being harsh. And he was the quintessential Zayda to his own cluster of attentive and adoring grandchildren, his Timna and Nadav, his Mayan, Gil and Kani, his Gaby, Sarah and Rachel. And of course, he extended his spread of love, of warmth and enchantment to his great-grandchildren, especially in the recent arrival of the fabulous twins. It was great joy to him. Mayan is going to speak shortly for the grandchildren about her Zayda. And I love Kani's description, these are Kani's words, that he was warm, he was selfless. There was nothing better than sitting next to him quietly and holding his soft hands. For Genya, he was the crown of the family. And then she and him did love crown. Yossl Baker was one of those rare and totally selfless individuals. Anita remembers how readily he embraced her when she first met him some 50 years ago. For Karen and I, Yossl was the real thing, the genuine article, generous to a fault, loving and giving to his family, to his friends. And he was, as Genya put it, especially modest and humble. His modesty, as she said, was unreal. He embodied, in Wordsworth's words, the best portion of a man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. He was Anav Mikol Adam. And nobody would have known that better than Genya. Yossl knew her every will and whim. He was especially attentive to her needs, and he had the equanimity, the gentleness, and the inimitable sweetness of soul to counter her passion, her largeness of personality, and her brilliance of mind. They were some duo. That's not to say that Yossl was a schlepper. Genya remembers how he worked tirelessly to build his business. Together with his brother Baruch, these two child survivors started with nothing and they created a substantial something. From selling sleeves to buying the first sewing machine, Yossl was at it with a vengeance and with a talent. He had an incredible nose and nous for figures and computer-like capacity. Just a week ago, Nadav called Zayda to get his input on an important business decision for the family. In Nadav's words, the issue was complex and had to be conveyed over the phone. Zayda needed no Excel formulas, no written brief. He was old school. He had the mind for numbers and was able to cut through all the fluff. He came up with a plan in a flash. Nadav reported back Zayda's plan to Zayda's nephew, Yechiel, who remarked, "Wow," and that's what made him the businessman that he's always been and still is, always 3 steps ahead of the rest. Yossl worked closely with his son, with Johnny, and he lived his life closely with Johnny and with Marky. The premature loss of Johnny, especially coming so soon after Karen's untimely passing, it left Yossl bereft. And to see his aching face at Johnny's shiva was almost unbearable. Timna told me it was Johnny's great heartache to know that he was leaving Buba and Zayda behind to grieve for him. And there will be an empty chair at the shiva, in the shiva home, Johnny's chair. Today is Rosh Chodesh Adar. It's the beginning of the month of Adar, beginning of our happiest month, the Purim month. Not a day that is meant for eulogies and sadness. But, you know, Purim is known for its close relationship to Yom Kippur. It's called Yom Kippurim, and for its own Ne'ilah themes. Purim is about the fragility of our lives, about the vulnerability of the Jewish people, about hatred and the threat of genocide. Purim is, too, about our triumph in the face of tragedy, our resilience when confronted with rampage. One of the most enduring images I will always carry with me, and I know many of you here will share that as well. It's the image of Yossl and of Genya dancing rock around the clock at every family simcha. And to see this broken man, to have seen him pick up the pieces and dance with his Genya from the beginning to the end of love, was nothing short of a Purim miracle in itself. Yossl has danced his last dance. He's attended his last Ne'ilah. The day has passed, the sun set, and the gates closed. So go gently, Yossl. As you leave this world, go well. Know that you've left behind a world brightened by your energy, by your generosity, and by your sweetness of soul. Mark is now going to speak, and he'll be followed by Marjan.
I know that you meant to give a short Hesped. I didn't know it was Rosh Chodesh, and I literally just finished writing it before I got into the car, and I haven't had a chance to cut it. And in surface, my mum gave me my dad's watch to wear, and the time has stopped, and so I can't time myself. So I'm just going to look at your faces if I'm going too long, and just stop in the middle. And so I'll try to talk fast so I can get to the other end, because I was prepared, but I wasn't prepared. Death is no stranger to my family. This is the 3rd time in 4 years I've sat on that dreaded bench, but today I'm alone with my mother and an empty space beside us. Back when the family plots were vacant, Johnny and I used to joke about who would be buried next to which parent, which of us would get to listen to an eternal recitation of my mother's poetic speeches about how being underground was not unlike her hiding spot in a black hole during the Holocaust, or who would be in direct earshot of my father's jokes, his business commentary, and the TV tuned on full blast between Hannity or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. That was meant to be a long way off in the future. Today has put that discussion to rest. Fate has determined it for us with a twist no one could have ever predicted about the tragic order of things. Johnny and I also used to joke that we have great genes. Only last week, one of my orphaned friends commented how unusual it is for our generation to have not one but two living survivor parents. There's also an irony in that, a painful one, that has highlighted for our family the cruel randomness of life. Until Karen and then Johnny joined the inhabitants of this ghostly shtetl, my dad came almost every Sunday for a consecration before moving on to Chatston to measure the condition of retail. While here, he would walk around the rows and aisles and point out the familiar graves, and with his Talmudic memory that could put a pin through the page of the life of any person, recite with precision an obscure or a hilarious story about Shlomo, about Moshe, about Maya or Frida, and the growing number of friends that were moving here until there was no one left back home to fill the four sides of a card table. His memory and ability to connect the dots was one of his most remarkable features, and he carried it until his last day. You all know that look, his mind whirring like a poker machine until ding, he hits the jackpot and the details of your relatives pours out. Ah, I knew your dad, your Zeta, when he was a tailor in Flinders Street. I bought yarn off him for £2 a yard in 1961. Or I remember your Bubba dance with Chaim in Maison Deluxe on a Wednesday, but he was little and when his head bumped her tzitzkes, his wig fell off. It's true. And then his body would convulse with laughter until tears streamed out of his eyes because he could actually see the scene unfolding before him in Technicolor, every frame of it going all the way back to Poland. No one has ever bumped into Yossl on the street without learning something they didn't know about their ancestors. Chayu, he would say, Chuyu, and then he'd tell you exactly who you were, rattling off stories like a Catskill comedian, a touch of the gossipy yenter in him, but never, never was there a hint of malice, and always, always it was done with loving humour. His humour. It was inbuilt in him and rippled through his whole body, his gesticulations, his passion, the way he lit up a room with his entire personality, and most of all with his eyes, sparkling, twinkling, blinking rapidly from overexcitement. There's the famous story from the Talmud of the house of Hillel and Shammai arguing through the night about whether God should create Adam and Eve. This argument was the one occasion that the rival schools came to a unanimous agreement. No, they said, adding that now that the deed is done, let's deal with the consequences. And in one sense, it's the emet. They were right. My parents' torments and suffering are testament to that. But on the other, if they could have gazed into the future and met my dad, they would have reached a unanimous view the other way. Yossl wasn't just larger than life. He created a parallel world of human possibility, of kindness, of unconditional love, almost perfection. And like any world, his had its own language. Yosslisms, we call them. I'm sure you won't hear a talk in the coming days that doesn't refer to his unique vocabulary. The words weren't random. They made grammatical sense. On their honeymoon, when my mum was 19, they went to Sydney and she got appendicitis. Such a hard word for a migrant, but he stripped away the medical pretensions and reduced it to its original source, a pain in the situs. In his world, not everyone was Jewish, but as the title of the Yiddish album from the 1960s went, when you're in love, the whole world is Jewish. Is he or she Jewish? Was always his first question, asked at the top of his voice, and it almost always pleased him to learn that they were, except he feared, as he told me last week, an outbreak of anti-Semitism if either Sanders or Blumenberg were elected. Blumenberg. Otherwise, he would turn Gentiles into Jews, such as Aaron Brockovich, who he called Aaron Berkovic, or the great actor Maximilian Schell, who somehow became his old friend Muscatel. And then there was his most famous line, Genyas in surface, and I'm in paradise. This week, that joke was tragically fulfilled. But until then, it was nothing more than a gag. For the truth is that my father never left my mother's side, not for a second. He was her protector, redeemer and carer from the day he courted her as a new immigrant to Australia. He spoiled me rotten, Mum will say, though she rightly takes credit that she tamed and anchored this handsome, muscly man whose post-war image is captured in a series of photos of him on a motorbike, I can't imagine that, or sitting on the bonnet of his Humberhawk, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. And so it seems fitting, hard as it is for us, that his sudden and unexpected death took place in Surfers Paradise, because our times there carry so many threads from his life and also now his death. I think of the holidays Johnny and I had as children at the Chevron, with so many family friends, many of whom are here now, but the older generation who aren't here, all of them survivors, who never spoke of their past but laughed around the pool or baked on the beach, smeared with baby oil with silver foil fans to attract extra sun. How they played red aces, and the times during my strict kosher days that my mum furtively cooked kosher schnitzel for me in a bathroom from the Patelnia, while my father fanned the smoke away until the high-rise apartments shadowed the beachfront and they made their home away from home in a lunga at Paradise Centre. How did they do it, these survivors? Did they cast their trauma behind them on their boats to Australia, deliberately choosing life over death, or more likely, did they bottle it up inside them, the past and present entangled, shaping their personalities? Like the time when I sat with my dad in their apartment in Surfers and I asked him to tell me his story, the only family tree he never wanted to explore, and I asked him how far the train was from the gas chambers when he arrived at Birkenau, and he casually pointed through the windows and said, "Oh, about from here to Cavill Avenue." Still, Surfers, it seemed, was a sanctuary that they could escape to, but in more recent years, it was a different experience they were trying to escape, but could never shake off. The loss of Karen, and then my brother and their son Johnny. At home, they were in deep grief within the four walls of their apartment, which they would never leave. After a 3-year break, we were relieved that they agreed to resume their visits to Surfers. While it was easier to keep a vigilant eye on them in Melbourne, they were more independent, an elevator ride from the arcade and the restaurants and the pokies. I won't say they were happy. That would be expecting too much. But the pain was more bearable away from Melbourne, where they felt caged in a prison of memories, eased through the daily phone calls from me and from Anita, which always began with a kvetch from my dad about how hard life is, because their grief always pursued them, even with the background TV sound of a tennis game and the roar of the expansive ocean. My mum said, "We've been coming to Surfers for 62 years, but nothing's the same." The times when they knew everyone in every apartment of Paradise Centre, a community of Holocaust survivors, is gone. The people around them were unfamiliar, yet everywhere they went, they were celebrities. In the time we were there last month, followed by visits from some grandchildren and other relatives, we were stunned. At Charlie's, home to the famous scene when Dad asked for a breakfast of raisin toast and was served a bowl of rice and toast, the waiters loved them, learnt his language, and so understood that when Dad asked for bruschetta, he meant a bruschetta, or that rumash meant mushroom. In the newsagent, where he ordered his weekly Jewish news and pile of magazines for Mum, which I took to the hospital a couple of days ago, the woman knew him so well, and when the kids went to tell her yesterday what had happened, she rubbed her arms with goosebumps and eyes with tears. At the Italian restaurant on Orchard Avenue, the young owners embraced them both, and my dad reminisced about how they played tennis together on the Balla Court 40 years ago, the court I stared at yesterday from the balcony where my mother was smoking her umpteenth cigarette, the court empty but imagining him with his distinct serve. In the Chinese restaurant on the highway, the owner almost fed his favourite customer with a spoon, and when we went to the casino, a French croupier who hadn't seen them for ages greeted them excitedly, especially my mum, with a cry of "Georgina." We saw it at hurricanes, overflowing with summer diners. I'm sorry, I was told. There's a 90-minute wait. I despaired and we left, but my dad had hobbled off with his stick, and within 30 seconds, a young manager chased me and said, "We have a table for you." How did you do it, Dad? This magic with people. But what my parents missed more than anything during their times in Surface were their 8 grandchildren, Timna, Nadav, Mayan, Gilad, Kani, Gaby, Sarah and Rachel, and their partners and especially their great-grandchildren. They are their lifeline, every single one of them whom my father adored unconditionally, and they in turn, I can't think of a better word, worshipped him. The day Gil and Shani brought the twins, Ziggy and Aya, from Byron to visit them in Surface, they were exploding with excitement and joy. Who knew that these 2 broken, grief-stricken people could find the space to be so inflated with boundless life and love? And so it came as no surprise that the trigger for their planned return came this week after a 3-month stay. "Book us a flight for Friday," my dad said. "Mummy's ready. We want to be back for our Rudilu's birthday on Sunday and his little sister, Addie." That booking was never made. On Friday morning, I got a call that my dad had fallen. Everything that happened from this point personifies him, and many of you haven't heard the story. They were on Cavill Avenue and an ambulance was called. My mum went up to the apartment to get his tablets and pack some things from him. He was in the ambulance when she returned, and the driver said she has to step aside. "No," she said, climbing in. "He would never leave me. Never. I'm sorry," they said. "You can't come into the ambulance." "No," she repeated, "and if you want me to leave, you will have to carry me out." They let us stay, of course. I got a call from the hospital at 8 the following morning, 7 Surface time. 20 minutes later, I was on my way to the airport, and when I arrived at the hospital, there was a bed made up for my mother, who had slept by his side in his room. She explained they'd been in the emergency department till 4 in the morning. "How did they get my number at the hospital?" I asked. "Dad remembered," she said, but he was delirious from a cocktail of drugs and from the pain in his fractured hip. "And why didn't you ring me when it happened in the middle of the night?" I asked, having only spoken to him about 2 hours before the fall. "Because Dad didn't want to wake you, and he told the hospital not to ring before 7 in the morning. From then on, it was a barrage of mediating with doctors and filling out forms. I don't even know how they got that far on their own. Every encounter exposed a different angle of his life, but nowhere did the truth come out more than when a nurse told me that he'd said when he arrived that he had come to Surface for the funeral of his son. How true in the deepest sense, and how revealing. As hard as they might try to compartmentalise their lives, the grief bleeds through the cracks and expresses itself openly when the unconscious is given permission to speak. From that moment, I became the mediator, stunned nonetheless that the 2 of them alone had got to this point with my mum hard of hearing. "How old was he?" they asked, handing me a form. I looked at the document and saw before me all the other documents I'd uncovered from his youth: his birth certificate, his school records, his Auschwitz and Buchenwald registration, his liberation papers and immigration papers to Australia. Each one of them showed a different birth date. In that second, when the nurse waited for my answer, I thought of the schoolboy born in Wierzbnik-Starachowitzer in Poland, who jumped through the windows of Cheder to escape his teacher and surpassed the naughtiest schoolboy act I've ever heard by pissing in the pocket of the Malamed's coat. I thought of the boy being marched up a hill before he was bar mitzvah with his brother Baruch, from where he spent the next 5 years in a series of slave labour camps before being sent to Auschwitz and then Buchenwald, where his father Leib had been killed in 1940, severed from his mother Hinda and sisters Marta and Yenta, who met their murderous fate in Treblinka. I thought of all the times someone whispered to him, "Tell them you're older, so that they send you to a better section of the camp," or "Tell them you're younger, so you're spared a certain death," or "so you're eligible for a visa to Australia." Time for my dad didn't move chronologically, but was measured by a split-second decision that granted the possibility of extending his life. So what do I tell the nurse and write in the form? His official date that is lived by in Australia, the 1st of June 1929, Or is it more important for the doctors to know that he was born 2 years earlier, making him 92? Perhaps I should trick them and say what he believed, that he was born on April 11th, 1945, the day of his liberation, an age that matched his boyish personality. Or show them the photograph of him as an older man pointing at the teenager in that iconic photo of him a month after his liberation in Buchenwald. The message to the nurses and doctors: give him another chance to live. His name. What do I write? Yossek? Who's Yossek? Joe, as he was known in business, or Yossl? Perhaps I should sing the Connie Francis song to him, as it was sung to him on his 60th birthday in our house at Aruna Road by Regina, and as Rachel played it through her phone in his dying moments, one of his theme songs. Ay, 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 Yossl, 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 Yossl. It's so sad, the kids said when they listened to it. I never thought of it as sad until then. And what of his surname? Baker, born Becker machine. I've learned to spell it with its crashing Polish consonants, Bekermaszyn. One thing, the Nazis didn't know how to spell it, nor did the Jewish agency who listed him and his brother as a survivor on their registry in 1946. Together they went to Geneva with that name and spent the next 3 years being rehabilitated. I caught a glimpse of that transitional time once on a family holiday, which I probably shared with some people here, to St. Moritz, where my dad put on a pair of ice skates and, who would know it, whizzed around the rink. Who would have thought that I'd find myself living in that same place for 4 months last year with Michelle? I went in search of some of the gaps from his past, as though I could rewrite a section of the 50th Gate. I found his name in the Swiss archives and the location of the Ort Jewish Training Centre where he was sent after recovering in a hospice from TB. Do you remember where you lived? I asked him over the phone. Oh, it was an orphanage, and he mumbled a name that no one in the Jewish community in Switzerland could recognise. Could you see the fountain from where you lived? I asked. Yes, I remember the spritz. And eventually I found the approximate location of the Jewish welfare home in Switzerland. But what surprised me more than anything was that he asked the officials if he could use his stipend to live in a private home because, and get ready for this, it was too noisy for him. My father, who had spent the previous 5 years in a string of death camps, summoned at dawn to the Appellplatz, where he shouted out his number. I don't think Auschwitz was a quiet place. Had finally found sanctuary, but thought it was too noisy. Perhaps this was the beginning of his transition from the adolescent who endured filth and bedbugs, torture actually, deciding that he'd expended all his energy on surviving and would later run at the side of a moth, or a mouse, as he cried, leaving my mum to do the swatting. The documents in Australia show confusion about his name. Johnny's birth certificate shows Becker machine, and it was soon after that he officially changed the family name to Baker, but upon receiving the document, still signed it Becker machine. The name even carries on to my birth, back and forth. Perhaps, I think, he didn't want to let go of the machine, because machines became his work life, starting with a single sewing machine, from which he built a business that exists to this day with his late and beloved brother Baruch, and now the next generation on both sides, led by Yechiel, Johnny's place represented by Nadav, called Swiss models appropriately after their time in Switzerland, though not really appropriately because it sounds like an escort agency. And then there is his number. Instinctively, it was one part of his body punctured in hospital with a mess of needles, beeping machines and tubes that we allowed ourselves to photograph. The nurses all noticed it and asked. I couldn't resist telling them his story because perhaps I hoped that the number would save him from death, as it did by sparing him from the gas chambers to the munition factories of the satellite camp Unamonowitz. Before going in for hip surgery, I was told about the risks and had to sign forms. He emerged from surgery with a positive message from the doctor. Soon after, things began to go wrong. His blood levels were dropping, and eventually the doctors discovered internal bleeding. He would need another anaesthetic that same day to allow for a gastroscopy to locate and stop the bleeding. He was still delirious when I went in with my mother from the previous operation, but he managed to get a few words out. his last words to us, "Genya hot gegessen, Genya, have you eaten?" he asked, looking at me and Mum. That was him, again, always thinking about others. His situation improved, and then we were told that he was critical and that he'd die the following morning. As we sat by his bedside and watched the numbers on the monitors dive, the kids played music in his ear from their phone. "Zayda," they said, "listen." And the first song was, of course, "Rock Around the Clock." That song is a beat that runs through his life, first danced alone when he came to Australia, about which he cheekily said that he went dancing 8 times a week, twice on Sunday. Soon after my mother arrived, she caught his eye, and from that moment they have rocked around the clock together, stepping in perfect harmony and knowing each other's movements like the inner mechanics of a Swiss watch. They danced at Station Pier, where their ship had docked in Australia for the launch of my book about them 25 years ago. They've danced it at every single Simcha and at every Buchenwald ball. And then when tragedy began to strike our family, they led the dance at Gaby and Gabby's engagement and wedding after Karen died. When Johnny was dying, I thought they would never be able to stand on their feet again. But when Gil and Shani got married soon after, they somehow rose from the grave they longed to share with him and lifted all of our spirits, and especially Anita's, by dancing. That's it, I thought, the last dance. But their clock miraculously wound up again when Michelle and I married, and they mounted the stage by leading our family in their rapturous dance. I still wanted more. We all did, even though my dad was now using a stick to walk and my mum's feet hurt. But the hands of the clock were ticking as the numbers on the ICU monitors plummeted. It's been too many times that I've had to watch my mother say her goodbyes to the people she loved. My dad found it harder to confront the deaths in our family and would stand by the doorway, quivering and weeping. But my mum, who has always been traumatised by the death of her own mother at the end of the war, insisted on facing the inevitable. On Karen's last day, she held her and shouted what would become the refrain of these past years: "Take me. If there's a God in heaven, then take me." And none of us will forget how she held Johnny's hand, stroked his piano fingers, as she called them, and pleaded to exchange places. Why, she still beats her chest, didn't they take me instead of Johnny? And so on Sunday, she had to do it again, this time with her partner, lover, and carer of 67 years. She brushed his hair and then made poetry out of every part of his body that she caressed. "These hands," she said, holding them, "worked so hard for our family." And then touching his chest, she said, "This heart had only love for us." And then she turned to the nurses and begged them to hook her to the machines and take her with him. "How can I live without my Yossl? I don't want to live. How can I?" When one of us tried to console her by saying that she'd be reunited with Johnny, she said, "What do you think I am, stupid?" We had to drag her out, and I sat with my father and watched as his rate suddenly flattened to 0. We played the songs to him, as I've said, but now without our Yossl. The song we will have to play is the one also sung by Connie Francis, the other one, My Yiddische Mama. My mum, who has literally walked in fire and Wasser, crossed fire and water for her children, Johnny and me, and in the days after, while we waited in surface for my dad to be taken home to Melbourne, my mum, who has been begging for the heavens to open for her, showed that same strength. Between her cries of agony, she also chatted to us. She is blessed with gorgeous grandchildren who love her as they love their Zayda, with great-grandchildren who, no matter what, make her smile, with a sister Sylvia, who saw Yossl as a father and her kids Gid and Shelley, and she has always been blessed with daughters-in-law who have cared for her. Anita, who has suffered so much and has loved and supported my parents since Johnny's school days. Karen, who was like a daughter to her after her own parents died. And Michelle, who yesterday my mother asked to share with me. She made her instructions very clear about what she wants. I never would have imagined it, but my mum is now the head, the matriarch of the family. I feel so relieved to know that she still, despite what we're seeing here today, has a reserve of strength, though I know she'll be more broken than ever. There's always been a song my father would sing for his two sons, then for each of his grandchildren, and now he does it for his great-grandchildren, until now. Life has a strange way of bringing beginnings and ends together. It's now for us to sing it to him, our baby, our Redeemer, our hero. Schlufschein, mir ma Yossl, mein Scheinschick, die eigentlich die Schwarzinke macht zu, a Jingele, was hat schon alle Zehndelech, muss noch die Tate singen, ai lilo, lolo.
Yossl, Zayda. If there's a single undisputed opinion in our family, it's that you were the absolute bee's knees, a legend, a hero. You welcomed each of us into the world with your gentle Yiddish lullaby, Schlufschein, your twinkly eyes, cheeky smile, and remained there, our guide into adulthood. We watched you as a husband, nurturing and loving your wife. As a father, your bond with Dad and Marky, one of true friendship and mutual respect. As a friend, celebrating, playing cards, joking around in Yiddish. We listened endlessly to your stories about the Mason Deluxe and dancing 8 times a week, twice on Sundays. Never a bad word about anyone, only love and high regard. We saw you at work as a boss, never talking down to anyone, never intimidating, walking around the factory you built with your dear brother, purposefully but humbly, in your bright orange oversized vest, greeting everyone along the way. Hello, girls. Hello, boys. Always a joke first, a laugh, personal connection before business. Spaces and faces would light up when you arrived. At work, hi Joe. At a communal event, Mr. Baker. Among your friends, Yossl. In Aruna Road, Zayda's here. Everyone was always delighted to see your gorgeous boyish face. As kids, our fondest memories are of surface, Grundies. You'd put your own fear of the ghost train aside so we could enjoy the thrill. There are precious videos of us at Alunga learning to swim and walk alongside you, playing tennis matches against you. There are photos of each of us sitting on your knee at our epic Pesach Seders. And at birthdays, you were always close by to make sure we were a safe distance from the candles. On grandparents' days at school, all our friends would recognise you, the cute Zayda who waved to everyone, called everyone darling, was everyone's darling. In the later years, it got harder to unite us around a Lunga pool, so regular grandchildren dinners at Romeo's or your favourite pizza joint became our way to catch up with you. In this way, you kept us together, your 8. We bonded over our great love for you. In relationships, all 8 of us either wanted to be like you or to be with somebody like you. Your commitment to Bubba was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. You literally could not leave her side and treated her like a queen. Your services included making sandwiches, switching on and off the TV, administering medication, keeping both of you in touch with us and the outside world via your iPhone and iPad. Your bickering was amusing to us, especially as it was in Yiddish, so we didn't know what was being said. But Dad's and Marky's giggles would assure us that these weren't the kinds of fights that led to bitterness. They were a spectacle, entertainment. Bubba loved and admired you more than anyone, and would report that regularly. Between the nudging and kvetching, she'd say, "But look at him, what an amazing man he is." Last night, on and on, she said, "There will never, ever, 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 ever be another man like him." Dad worshipped you. We all know the stories about manually pushing the Pontiac down the driveway so Johnny wouldn't know when Daddy was leaving the house. To quote Bubba, "Scholastically, Johnny was like me, but as a father, as a person," and she'd point to you. There wasn't a thing Dad wouldn't do for you. 10 o'clock at night, Foxels playing up. Dad was there. He wouldn't pass within a 3-kilometre radius of your street without popping in, your favourite cake and bagels in hand. Throughout his illness, his greatest concern was not for himself, not for us, but for you and Bubba. He knew how your hearts would break. He would be happy for you that you're now able to rest without pain, without heartache. He would be devastated for Bubba. In business, you were a mastermind. People sensed your integrity and trusted you immediately. You knew the business inside out, didn't require a calculator, much less a spreadsheet, to get your head around a problem, and as recently as 1 week ago, were consulted about an issue which you swiftly resolved. But you were never one to blow your own horn. So it was from other people that we learnt of your great reputation, your quiet generosity and charitability. You never said no if there was a chance you could say yes. You were so grateful for and committed to your community of Buchenwald boys. You shared such a special bond with those men, and we were in awe of this sacred connection. And your 4 great-grandchildren, Yossl, even as a great Zeta, you quickly managed to win their hearts. Rudy and Addie are your mates and adore you. You've always known exactly how to pitch things to them, to relate to them as people. And with Aya and Ziggy, you hit it off too. You instinctively knew not to overwhelm them, just hold and kiss their hands. So lucky you got to meet them. They'll all miss you, Zeta. On Sunday, you left us, and the world lost one of its brightest sparks. Certainly our family's brightest spark. Comforting images of heaven are usually reserved for children, but this week, with the loss of our Zeta, we are children. So can we just for a moment imagine that the reunion that might be happening out there somewhere right now? Our Yossl, our Karen and our Johnny together. The twinkling eyes, the smiles, the proud exchange over how well the kids and Marky and Mum are doing. The warm welcome of Zeta, we hope, into familiar arms. Zeta, Yossl, our Yingale, you were there for each of us, welcoming us into the world, cradling us with your soothing song, ushering us to sleep, guiding us through life. Now it's our turn to cradle you on your way out. Shluv shoyd mir, our Yingale, our Sheinchik. Rest, our beautiful little man, our darling.
We'll just say one more of the Tilim and then we'll proceed. Kuf Chafal of 121. Shir lamalo tesainai le'arim e'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai se'shamayim v'aretz al yiten lamot rak lecha al yanum shomrecha hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael Adonai shomrecha Adonai tzilcha yad yiminecha yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra yishmor et nafshecha Adonai yishmor tzedcha v'echa me'ata ve'ad olam. We're going to proceed now with the burial. We'll ask everyone to please leave through the back exits. I'll just make mention of the minyanim, which will be tonight, Thursday, tomorrow night, and Sunday night at 7 o'clock at 51 Aruna Road. That's Anita's place, 51 Aruna, 7 o'clock. And please look at the Chevra site for the Shiva visiting times, which will also be at 51 Aruna between 2 and 5 on Thursday and Sunday. So if you'd like, please leave through the back exits, except for the family. We'll leave through the door here.